Hello. Well, welcome back to our second series, introducing some legislators. And in the great seat today, we have Lord Clement-Jones. Lord Clement-Jones is a Liberal Democrat, appointed CBE in 1988 for political services and made a life peer in 1998. He currently serves as the party's House of Lords spokesman for science, innovation, and technology. And from personal experience, he's a leading voice on AI policy. And since he co-chaired the first House of Lords Select Committee on AI in 2017, in the same year, co-founded and continues to co-chair the All-Party Parliamentary Group on AI, and 2 years later, co-founded the OECD Parliamentary Group on AI. In 2023, he initiated and served on the Special Inquiry Select Committee into AI in Weapons System, and in 2024, published his book, Living with the Algorithm, Servant or Master. I have a signed copy, which offers a practical and urgent framework for AI governance and policy, exploring risks such as bias, job displacement, etc., and arguing for regulation that ensures AI remains a servant to humanity, not its master. And beyond science, of course, very much involved in his legal, political, and public service careers, formerly as managing partner at global law firm DLA Piper, and of course in higher education, co-chairing the Council of Queen Mary, University of London, and recently appointed as the chair of the Authors Licensing and Collecting Society. Welcome, Lord Clement-Jones.
Hi, Christian.
Hello. And with us today, once again, Emeritus Professor, proponent of Darbus and Thaler, and of course, all-round AI and policy expert, Ryan Abbott, and Common Counsellor and partner at Keystone Law with Ryan Abbott, James Tunbridge. Welcome. Today, of course, because we have and are privileged to be joined by Lord Clement-Jones, perhaps I could start with just a couple of questions and then open it to the floor. Lord Clement-Jones, we'd be delighted to hear from you, given the prolonged delay in concluding the 2025 copyright and AI consultation. What do you see as the most immediate legislative opportunity for the UK to assert, some have argued, global leadership, or at least co-leadership in Europe, in AI governance, particularly in creating legal certainty for innovators, rights holders, foundation model developers, etc.?
Well, it all depends, what you're trying to achieve here. What I'd be trying to achieve is the right kind of cooperation between the tech industry, the tech sector, and the creative sector. And to some extent, it's actually a false dichotomy because we know that the creative industries use tech nowadays to a huge extent, whether it's the film industry, the games industry, authors using AI for certain purposes, other creators creating images. We know that marketeers are using image creation via AI. So what I would hope is the net outcome is that both thrive. So I'm not going to, root myself too firmly in one camp or another because I do think it's compatible. And what I want to see is that the content that is created by individual creators, by creative businesses, it does retain its copyright protection when it's used for training of AI systems. And we have the historical problem where no compensation really has been paid, where there's been training on a massive scale of content. We know all about LibGen now, which is this pirated library of something like 500,000 works, and where Anthropic have now had to pay damages or done a settlement, if you like, of $1.5 billion, which is being dispersed amongst those authors of those 500,000 works. So, it's clear that there's been massive piracy, if you like. But going forward, it's really important if we're going to have a licensing regime, which I think is our aspiration, and certainly mine as chair of ALCS, which you mentioned very kindly. But also, when I look at PPL, I look at PRS, I look at the other collecting societies, I look at the Motion Picture Association of America, I look at all those bodies and people who have a vested interest in creativity and creative content. What we all want to see is transparency of use. So we want to see, actually not undissimilar to the sorts of things which are mandated by the AI Act and the Copyright Directive in Europe. We don't like the text and data mining exception, but what we do want is to see that level of transparency. So it's possible to be able to enforce your rights because you know that they have been infringed, or you know that the developer of an AI model has actually ingested your material for training purposes. And that is so important because, we've seen through things like the Getty case, um, against Stability AI, that actually, one of the real problems is evidential. How do you prove that your material's been copied? How do you prove it's been stored? I mean, I thought one of the most peculiar aspects of that particular case was that the judge decided that the material hadn't been stored when clearly outputs in my view, I mean, I'm not, I don't build neural networks or neural nets for a career, but I think I know how they're built. The fact is that the outputs, I mean, Audrey Hepburn in front of Tiffany's or whatever, you could create a Getty image very easily, and it would be identical to their existing one, and therefore, along with the trademark along it of Getty. So, they granted the trademarks had been infringed, but they didn't say that the image had been stored, and I find that rather peculiar because I can't see how you can have an output like that without it having been stored.
I think, I mean, those comments, you've covered a great deal, and we could actually just talk about the case. But I wanted to just pick up on an earlier part of your answer. Could you just give us a little more thought about how useful you think the collecting society model might be? I was involved, as Christian was, in some of the submissions to the government consultation. I was pushing that for a couple of reasons. I'd just love to get your take on those two reasons. The first is I thought if you want to encourage people to declare their works, to actually give tech industry a bigger library to work from, it might be a good way to get them to do that. And that secondly, although they might not get as much money in that licensing model in terms of an author as a direct license would, at least they get something so that you were sharing the fruit, you were getting some income, and you were building up a publicly declared library. And I just wondered, do you think any of those ideas are any good?
Oh, I mean, I'd love to have a sort of national data library, if you like, if I had some confidence that it was going to be workable. And the only way you can make something like that workable is making sure that you've got a duty of transparency. The National Data Library, if it worked, would be fine. But there are some many existing collecting societies. We have software, we invest in software on behalf of our members, AI matching of members' works against the secondary use, particularly in ALCS, is quite a technological thing you have to do. We've got, 130,000 members, and what we're trying to do is match, the secondary rights, photocopying and so on, against our individual members' works. And, that's not easy, but, it is done. And, it may not be 100%, but they get a small income each year as a result of that. And it's the same with musicians and performing rights. And, so it's not as if anything's broken, but what is the case is that, we don't always know when the works are being used, and that's primary rights, not just secondary rights. And one of the issues is, of course, that it's not always clear whether publishers have retained or have acquired AI training rights, or whether the individual author has got them. Now, we would say that if it's not explicit in a contract, then basically the author retains those, and therefore, we want to be able to help the author assert those rights. And of course, what you then have to do is get the consent of your authors, unless you have what's called an extended collective license, which is more like a compulsory license. But you need to consult pretty heavily if you're going to plunge into the world of compulsory licensing. So we are in a bit of a new world. And once we've got through that, we don't know whether the demand will be there, whether Anthropic will suddenly come forward and say, yeah, we really like the idea of this license that you're proposing we take out for those academic journals and all that sort of thing, because, we really want to be able to answer questions on, I don't know, nuclear physics or whatever the papers are about. We don't know the answer to that. So what we do want to do is to show willing and show that the government's ideas of a text and data mining exception, where you have to opt out, is completely contrary to traditionally what we've managed to secure in terms of rights protection.
That's very, very interesting. Ryan, do you have anything to add, or
No, it's great insight. I mean, you said you don't know yet whether kind of Anthropic's going to come around asking for a license rather than paying out settlements like this, but it's been a while. As you've been in the thick of it, have developers been coming around to a voluntary licensing model, or your sense is there's going to be a need for legislation to really bring them to the table to do this?
I think it's a bit of both. It depends on the perception of the value of the content and the data. I mean, the news media organizations, I mean, we've seen the FT strike deals, we've seen News Corp strike deals, where it's valuable and it's kind of current affairs-ish. I think in order to run their large language models like a search engine, that's what they've had to do, basically, so that they not only can train, but they can use the content. So, this is a slightly different situation because, where you just using a novel in a sense to get your syntax right, that is not particularly, it's a past thing. They can say, well, I've got no further use. My model has been trained now. I can write perfect Jane Austen, or I can, I can do a Henry James novel or something. So that's all in the past, and that's what worries a lot of creatives. That their works have already been ingested. The kind of Anthony Horowitz type book, and they can just churn out, another 14 books involving that hero, and I can't remember what he's called now. The teenage spy, more or less. But that's the trouble. And what we're trying to do is to kind of get some stakes in the ground. And the truth of the matter is that the new regime, I mean, and when I say new regime, I mean a new Secretary of State, not a new government, because nowadays policies change between Secretaries of State, as we've seen. And Liz Kendall and Lisa Nandy are both somehow, I don't know whether they're repenting or what, but they're certainly much keener on sovereign AI and UK successful sectors like the creative industries and financial services than ever was expressed by the previous Secretary of State.